Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion, the new Mentor-Protégé program for small and large businesses, sponsored by ProPricer on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests are Emily Murphy, a partner at CEO Coaching International and a former administrator of the General Services Administration, and Angela Stiles, a partner with the law firm Aiken Gump, Strauss, Hauer, and Feld, and a former administrator of the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. Emily, Angela, the last segment, we're talking a lot about the changes that SBA brought forward just about a year ago to the Mentor-Protégé program, some of the benefits that come with it, the technical assistance across 7 areas. Emily, you mentioned one of those benefits is creating a joint venture, and not only large businesses can be mentors, but so can small businesses. So a larger small business can mentor a smaller small business and then create a joint venture. That also, though, can be challenging for many ways. What are you starting to see from that setup of a joint venture that could lead them to maybe an obstacle that maybe is unexpected?
Thanks, Jason. So one of the reasons that I think larger small businesses consider the Mentor-Protégé program going in as a mentor is it helps them bridge that gap from being a small to being another than small, and they can continue to work with their clients. They just change the role that they're doing that in, and so a program can remain with the small business, or a contract can remain a small business contract. They can continue to work on it, and they're actually bringing along the next generation of small businesses, which I know a lot of companies care about. The challenge, though, is that some agencies, when they look at those joint ventures, are starting to ask questions not just about the individual capabilities of the members of the joint venture, but what has the joint venture done together? And so if you form a joint venture that doesn't include some history of having performed work commercially with the government, done something together previously, in some cases, they're finding that to be you'll lose points on a scorecard. For example, the Polaris GWAC, the draft RFP suggested that your responsibility, the organizational responsibility, could be downgraded if you don't have that history of having performed together. So this is not a cure-all for going after a new large contract. It should reflect an existing relationship that's already in place between those two companies.
And I think it bears in mind to be very thoughtful when you're looking at a particular RFP for what you find in those requirements, right? So when Emily and I were talking about this before, organizational structure and how the companies work together sounds a lot like the past performance of a joint venture. And so it is a little bit about being thoughtful about what you bid on and, what the requirements are for what you're bidding on, because you're spending a lot of time and energy each time you choose something to actually bid on, to participate in. And, some you will have better success at than others. And if you look at an RFP and it says this in the organizational section, you may have second thoughts. If you're brand new and you really haven't worked together much before and you don't have all the things that the agency may be looking for.
I was going to say, to follow up what Angela's saying, I would also strongly advise my clients that when they're considering entering into a mentor-protégé agreement, you don't want to get married before you've had a date. So you want to have some experience of working together, because you've got a 2-year minimum commitment to each other, and you want to know that you're going to work well together. So if this is just a marriage of convenience to go after a contract, it may not serve you well in the long run. If this is actually a joint venture where the two of you are going to be able to really complement each other, and it's a case where 1 + 1 = 3, then the mentor-protégé agreement and the joint venture make a lot of sense.
And this is Angela, and I think that that's particularly important to bear in mind when you're dealing with what you raised a few minutes ago, Jason, is small businesses in a joint venture together. Are you competitors, or are you complementing each other? Is one about to become other than small? What are people's motivations behind this, and how is it going to work? I think Emily's exactly right. I mean, these are difficult business situations, and you really do need to know what you're getting into before you step into it.
Angela, we're gonna recuse Emily from this question because of her previous job. But is it fair that something like Polaris is deducting points if there's no past history under a joint venture? Because it's almost like, well, you can't have a job unless you have experience, but how do I experience unless if I have a job? It seems to be a chicken or the egg discussion.
Yeah, I don't like it. I mean, for me, it's a backdoor way to get to past performance. I mean, that's what you're saying without, actually saying this is past performance. And so That's always the struggle of small businesses is, well, what, and it's just a struggle for joint ventures as well. And the statute was supposed to take care of this, but it's kind of another way to get at the same question of past performance of the joint venture.
And we know that the CPARs, right, the CPAR system, the past performance system is not a good one. Everyone's rated, adequate or satisfactory. And we talk about this with, if you have kids, satisfactory is never good enough for your child. So why is it good enough for your performance on a contract? But I think that's a whole different discussion we could go down. Emily, let me bring you back around. Some of the other challenges or benefits you're seeing when it comes to mentor-protege relationships. What are some of the potholes maybe companies need to avoid?
So when looking at the mentor-protege arrangement, being very explicit about what you expect, because SBA is going to come in and grade you on what you said you were going to do in that plan. And so lots of people want to throw everything in the kitchen sink into the agreement so that they're covered on all aspects of it. But that doesn't, SBA is going to come back and then say, did you actually provide them with export assistance? Well, no, neither of us really do any export. Well, then why was that in the agreement? That means you didn't live up to the terms of the agreement. One of the areas of assistance that's permitted under the new agreement is that a mentor can purchase up to 40% of the protege. And that could be an incredibly powerful tool for aligning the interests of the two companies. It can provide the small business with an incredible influx of cash and help them financially. But it also raises questions long term about what the protege is going to do after the mentor-protege agreement ends, and they all will eventually end. And so going to it, looking at it not just as a short-term agreement, but also where you're going to be at the end of the agreement, both for the mentor and the protege, because the mentor has bought 40%, still owns that 40% at the end of the agreement as well.
And this is Angela. One thing that I tell every client, whether it's a small business, in a mentor-protege and JV agreement, it's protect your intellectual property. So the most valuable thing that you have as a company is your intellectual property. And when you're doing business with other people and with the government, they may be seeking access to your intellectual property. And so, the one thing you should always hire a lawyer for is to make sure that your intellectual property is adequately protected, because the last thing you want to do is build this great business and be giving over your intellectual property to either your mentor or to the federal government.
And Angela, I mentioned that happens, unfortunately, more times than you'd like to see, in the sense of the small business, because it's an owner who's maybe had some skill sets at the software coding or providing services, but they're not necessarily skilled at understanding, hey, you have some IP here that you've just given up or you no longer control. Imagine that's a big pothole that people step in quite too often.
It happens all of the time. And it really, the government's become more aggressive and wanting more rights and intellectual property. And, I think larger businesses, many of them aren't as creative at developing new intellectual property. And so part of what they're out there looking for is, companies to buy, but also the intellectual property of particular small businesses that may help their business in the long run.
And Emily, the other side of this is, because you mentioned, and there's a short term where you're going to be at the end of the agreement. There's a big decision by the protege. How much do they really give to the mentor? What are the benefits for the mentor? I mean, giving up to 40% of your company is a pretty big chunk of what you're giving up there. How can they work through those decision processes?
So a mentor-protege program, just like every other decision, should be part of a long-term plan. The companies I coach, we look at how they're going to grow from the day we start to 3 years out, 5 years out, what you're going to do this year, but it's also got to be part of a longer vision. So if that 40% investment gives you the cash that you need to invest in new technology, expand your market, do some things you need to do, and it's the right deal for you for that long-term vision, then it can be a really powerful tool. If it's just a chance for you to do some risk and burden shifting, or take some money out of the business, it may not be the right move at that time. If it's going to just align you to that company in the long run, and after the mentor-protege program expires, your agreement expires, you're going to then be found affiliated to them because you're going to have too much undue reliance on them. 40% wouldn't put you into owned and controlled, but if you're trying to have undue reliance on them at the end of that agreement, that might not be the right decision, and that might not be the right investment to take. You might be better off looking at a different avenue for finding financing.
Yeah, this is Angela. From my perspective, it's so important to look at that end game there. And if you're ultimately going to be affiliated, whether it's economic dependence or whether it's their percentage of ownership at the end of the day, because you want to be your own business that if you're small can continue to compete as small and not be affiliated with your mentor. And the rules are tough. I mean, they really are tough. I mean, the program is, intended to eliminate those rules for an interim period of time. But once that's gone, you want to make sure that you are no longer affiliated, that you are still a small business if that's what you want to be.
I'm familiar with that 51% rule, right? You have to continue to own at least 51%. If you're a woman-owned business, a small disadvantaged business, does that also apply now under Mentor-Protégé? You can't sell more than 40%. This is my understanding of it. But the affiliated rule becomes when you sell, when that 40% starts, you leave the program and starts pushing closer to 50%, or help us understand what you mean by the affiliated
Yeah, it's also
rule.
Control. So there's ownership and control and affiliation. And so you can control a company with 40% ownership, and you can control it through economic dependence. You can control it through mutual management. You can have mutual board members that would also cause it to control. You can have loan covenants. And so there can be all kinds of ways you can exercise what's called negative control. And the rules are very strict, I have to say. I mean, there's a lot of case law at the Office of Hearing and Appeals at SBA on what's affiliation and what's not affiliation, but you really have to think carefully about what is the role of the larger business at the end of your mentor-protege agreement.
And Jason, as an example, this is Emily again, a small business can be found to be affiliated with a prime contractor that they're doing subcontract work if that accounts for more than 70% of their revenues at any time. So even though they might be operating independently, the idea is that they are so unduly reliant on that prime contractor to give them work that they wouldn't exist in the same form if that company were to withdraw their business. So it really has to be part of a long-term strategy on making sure you have a diverse set of clients, you have a diverse set of income, that you understand the ownership and control, that you're working towards a long-term vision, and that you're working with the right technical experts to avoid those pitfalls, because there are a lot of pitfalls there.
It sounds like it's a good program, but has some complications. We're just about out of time. Emily, I'm going to give you the last word here. Based on your experience and looking at this rule from SBA, I'm going to ask you for one piece of advice for our friends in the small business world who are considering mentor-protege programs. Obviously, beyond find the right professional for help in case they think they need it. But what's your one piece of advice?
Make sure that the Mentor-Protégé program is not just a tool to address a specific contract, but it's part of a long-term strategy, and that it really fits into your long-term goal for where you see your business going in 5 years.
All right, excellent. And you did it in less than a minute, so I appreciate that. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today, so let me thank my guests. Emily Murphy is a partner at CEO Coaching International and a former administrator of the General Services Administration. Emily, always a pleasure to catch up. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jason. It was great being with you.
And Angela Stiles is a partner with the law firm Aitken Gump, Strauss, Hauer, and Feld, and a former administrator with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. Angela, great to catch up as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jason, and Emily as well.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion, the new Mentor-Protégé program for small and large businesses, sponsored by ProPricer on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search ProPricer.